and secure. Thanks, Kim, for hitting record on that. We managed to stack and secure a lot of grants for our municipalities and for ourselves as well in order to run those programs. And so we've gotten a lot of experience over the number of years that we've been doing this, and we've learned what works, what doesn't, what some good tips and tricks in order to make it more efficient and to improve our opportunities and our chances of success. We can't write the grants for you. We don't have that kind of capacity here at SouthGrow. I've got a pretty small team, but my team is very knowledgeable. And if you call us up looking for help, we can tell you where to find the grants that might apply to you, if there's anything out there that applies to your specific situation. And we can give you deliberate advice on how to put together a funding package or find a way forward on the project that you're working on and push you in the right direction. So if you are in one of our member of communities, those 29 communities that are part of SouthGrow, if you're a nonprofit, a community group, a charity, you can reach out and get that free advice. So number one, where do we find grants? If you go online, there's grants from all over the place. It can be a bit of a schmoz. You probably all know what I'm talking about. It's a patchwork landscape that's hard to find exactly what you're looking for. And it'd be nice if there was one individual repository where you could go to get information on that. My favorite place to go, and I know marketing for a private business here, is Alberta Business Grants Limited. If you plug that in, you'll go to this guy's website. His name's David. He's a professional grant writer. And one of his marketing gimmicks is that he makes this really, really well organized database of grants freely available. And that's where I like to go to look because it's free, it's accessible. The man does this for a living, and he's made it extremely easy to find out what grants might apply towards your particular project. There's a search function you can follow. You can sign up for his newsletter as well, and you'll get newsletters coming from him regularly talking about what's coming up. He puts the things right at the top of the list that are, these are the things that are coming up in the next few months to watch for. It's a very good resource. There's also websites like grantmatch.com or albertagrantwatch.com that you can go to and sign up as well. And there are many paid services out there where you can pay a few bucks a month in order to sign up, where you can use their tool to search the environment. These are good services. If you really want to just take the guesswork out of it, it's probably worth the money if you plan on writing a lot of grants and want to get that functionality out there for you. So yeah, that's where we find grants at. Some grant writing tips. So when you're starting to look at a grant, a few very obvious things that might spring to mind is number one, start early and plan ahead because every grant process is different. Some grant writing takes hundreds of hours in order to pull it off successfully, and other grants you can complete in less than an hour. It really does run that wide of a range. So you want to really dig in and understand the funder. What is it that they're trying to achieve? Because they want to give money to somebody who really meets what they want to get. I mean, you obviously have a project you want to get funded, but the funder is trying to get something for their money. That's why they're giving it. So you need to understand what they are after to understand if your project has a good fit with it. Because if it's not a good fit, you're just wasting everybody's time and you might not even want to bother going after it. And then you want to dig in and read the guidelines carefully so you know what the roadmap is ahead of you in order to get to the finish line. Once again, when I talk about learning from mistakes, I've gone down the pathway of spending a lot of time writing grants before where I didn't read the guidelines carefully enough and got to the finish line and suddenly realized, oh, I'm not actually eligible, or I'm missing something that I really needed to have in this, and now I have no time to get it. I've learned those lessons the hard way by not reading the guidelines carefully enough. What I like to do is to go through the guidelines and make a point form list as I read through it of everything that needs to happen before the deadline so that I can meet the deadline and get it done. And then I triage that list. I look and see, okay, what are the things that are out of my control? I want to put those up at the top and get them done first so that I could give other people who might have to help me out as much time as possible to get their stuff done. And then tick down the list, triaging my way to the finish line. And then, of course, the really important thing too, as I've kind of alluded to above, is to align your goals of your project with what the funder wants. I've run into communities before where they're like, well, this is the project we want, and we want to get money from this grant funder. We can do that, right? And I'm like, okay, well, I go and look at the priorities and there's not a fit there. But the community or the business or the nonprofit is not willing to change their project in order to meet what the funder wants. So you need to look at your project and think, okay, the only way I'm going to get money from a funder is if I give them what they want. And I know that I want my project to be this, but is there any way that I can shift it a bit or shift the rhetoric around it or shift the parameters of my project just a bit in order to better align with what the funder wants? You got to go and meet them in the middle so that you actually have a chance to get the money. I mean, of course, like you're sacrificing maybe what you really want to get out of your project, but the benefit of it is that you actually can get a project and get funding for it. Whereas if you're not willing to change the alignment of your project, maybe you don't get the funding and maybe it never happens. So there's some compromising and a compromised mindset that's often needed. Um, be as concise as possible. So when you're writing these things, try to use simple and concise language. You want to these people are going to be reading a lot of different things and it's going to be a bit of a slog. You got to remember that there's a human on the other end who's tired, who's got kids and stresses and pressures, and they're probably going to be skimming. So if you can be more simple and more concise and precise in your language, you make their job easier. You still want to be able to flesh out what you really want to do and show that you've really thought this through. But it's finding that right balance between making it easy as possible for the person who's reading it to absorb what you're doing and understand what you want to achieve and still getting your full message across. A few tips too. You want to define the problem. What is the problem that you're trying to solve? And then provide the solution. How are you going to solve that solution? What I really, really like too is to set SMART goals. These are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-oriented goals. So lay out in your text how you're going to tackle your solution, the implementation of your project in a way that's very specific, that you've thought this out very, very clearly. You metrics are, you know what your all of your individual details goals are. It forces you to sit down and really think through your project and show that you can actually get this thing done if they give you the money. So if you don't know what SMART stands for, you can just Google it, look up SMART goals or smarter goals, and it'll tell you. And I really like using that rubric as a guideline for how I put projects together because it communicates very effectively how am I going to actually achieve this thing so that it's not just a make work project, so that it provides an end result that's definitive. And then, of course, you want to have a detailed budget. The more of these details you can flesh out shows the funder that you're ready to go. Even if you're just kind of making it up, it shows you've thought through it, you are ready to go, and it convinces them that you can deliver on the project that they're helping to fund. Include timelines, of course, too. Think through the project and think, okay, if I get the money, how is this all going to flow out reasonably? And then, of course, you really want to show the impact, drawing a circle back around to the alignment. What does the funder want, and how is the impact that you're going to achieve aligning with what the funder wants to pay for? Show them how they get a win that makes their people really, really happy that they funded your project. Give them that win. Show it to them very, very clearly, and you increase your chances of getting the funding for your project. Supporting documents. Attach peer-reviewed or professional evidence or qualifications if and where you can. Show that the thing that you're doing is best practice or is supported by good research that says, hey, this is a great idea. This is how we're going to change the world. This is how we're going to support our community. Highlight the qualifications of your team. If you can throw in CVs to show that your team has the chops to finish the project, that's always great too. Convinces them that you can get this thing done. And you can't have enough letters of support. Usually you can get a whole bunch of letters of support and you can bundle them together into one PDF, just combine all the PDFs together. And the more of those that you can throw in there, the more that it will press on the people who are looking at these grants that, wow, this community really believes in this project and they really, really support this. And of course, there's some grants that are just straight up political. A great example is the CFEP grant here in Alberta, the Community Facilities Enhancement Program. It is straight up political. You want to get your MLA support for that because they likely will only give their support to one project. And if you get your MLA support for that CFEP grant, your chances of getting that are very, very high. So yeah, always keep that in mind that if these are politically governed grants, people do play politics with them. And it's something to keep in mind too. And then submissions. Aim to submit early so that you have time in hand for emergencies. This is important. Once again, talking about how I've learned by making mistakes. I have been at the 11th hour before trying to submit grants and the portal breaks. The technology just won't do its thing because everybody's trying to pile in, and the online website is not equipped. Much data is trying to go through it. So try to give yourself time. If you're submitting the day before a deadline, you're going to have a good time, or you're going to have time in hand to problem solve. Portals are notorious for breaking. I've noticed over the past 7 years that they've been getting better. But even last week with the Can Export grant from the Canadian government, their entire team out in Ottawa was on deck problem solving. They had a whole IT group up and running to answer people's calls to help them because it was a disaster. And me and one of my team members were trying all day to get all of the various documents in so that we could get those things submitted on time. So one of the tips that we've learned is to write all the text that's going into an online portal in a text document first. So I'll get into a grant portal and I'll go through the whole grant and I'll copy and paste the questions and the character limits out into a Word document. And then I do all my work there. And then all I've got to do once it's done is get it uploaded. And then I try to upload at least the day before the deadline. So once again, I've got time in hand in case the portal is not being good, if it's having problems. And of course, once you're uploading, save all the time. I don't know how often in the past that I've not saved enough and then the portal breaks or your information's not saved for some reason because the internet is fickle and you have to re-enter everything or you have to retype everything. Of course, you want to have a checklist going too to make sure that you got everything. You don't want to get to the end with the 11th hour and suddenly realize that you don't have a critical piece that needs to go in with that grant. And of course, if you have somebody to check your work as well, never hurts. Somebody else in your office just to look over it. Even if you're a really good writer, our eyes start crossing when we're writing lots of stuff. So just have somebody else look at it as well. So we are busy people. If you work for a municipality, I appreciate how incredibly busy you are. And sometimes just writing the grant is the impediment to actually getting things done. So a few tips that we've learned. Number one, ChatGPT is great. I recommend using it, but cautiously. Um, People who review grants are getting very, very used to seeing ChatGPT generated text. And sometimes it's fine. And sometimes I think it just puts them off because they're like, oh, this person didn't really put thought or effort into this. They just generated a whole bunch of stuff and jammed it in here. A really good way to use it is to generate ideas. So if you can use ChatGPT to generate the framework of the thing you're trying to say, like give me 10 points that support this particular point I'm trying to make, 10 different supporting arguments, but in point form, and then flesh them out and put them into your own words so that it sounds human and it sounds like you yourself have thought through it and it's in the same voice as the rest of the typing that you've done. I feel like the good balance point here myself is to use ChatGPT to give you ideas, to help take the brain power out of what are my supporting points? What are the key things that I need to hit on instead of generating the full text? And number two, establish a culture of flexibility in your municipality or your organization. This is a great example, and I saw Bryce sign on here, so I apologize, Bryce, if this seems close to home. But some councils have mandates saying, listen, if it's outside the budget, if we're going to be putting in a letter of commitment to a grant, it has to come to council, and council has to vote on it. And since council meetings only happen every so often, so many weeks, and they're full, sometimes it can be really hard to get a letter of commitment for your grant application in time, saying that yes, the municipality is willing to put up the money if you give us the grant, that sort of thing. And the reason this is a problem is because sometimes with grants, you just don't have the time. Sometimes the window's open only for a couple of months and you didn't realize that the grant was there or you didn't figure out what project you were going to do until a couple of weeks away from the deadline. And by that time, it gets really, really hard to go after that money. But councils can put into place any procedures or policies that they want. And what I've seen work in some communities really, really well is that the CAO has got the power to write letters of commitments for grant for whatever he wants under the expectation that it will go to council eventually for council to look over and to approve. But it's just a letter. There's no legal commitment for you to follow through with that. If the granting agency comes back and says, okay, here's your grant, congratulations, you don't have to take it. You can say, sorry, things have changed. We're not able to follow through. We apologize. And that's fine. And they can turn it around and give it to somebody else who's applied because almost always grants are oversubscribed anyways, right? But just having that procedure of flexibility and the culture of flexibility in place so that you can get your grant letters written and in and apply on time without having to go to council just frees up so much time and makes things so much easier and lets the flow go easier. So if you're in one of those municipalities, I highly recommend having a procedure like that approved by council so your CAO can just write letters knowing that he's going to bring them to council eventually for approval, and you don't have to accept the grant unless council says yes anyways. And of course, save everything. Save it all in a very, very neat and orderly database. We've got databases just filled with all the various grants we've written so that when we're rewriting a grant we wrote from in the past, we can go straight back to that and we can pull copy forward. We can pull templates forward. We can pull letters of support forward and go back to the people who gave us the support and edit them up and ask them to approve them. Um, the more you save and the more you reuse old stuff that you've made, the more time you save. And it just makes things so much faster. Uh, when you have to go out and get stuff done by other people, when something is outside of your control, I highly recommend typing everything for them. In like 99% of cases, they will be absolutely fine with that as long as you type it in a way that they would say and say, I've provided you a suggested letter of support or a suggested letter of commitment or whatever it is. Please look over it, edit if you like, and let me know if you're good to go with this. And as long as you take the work out of it for them, it's a lot easier for them to turn it around and fire it back. Because one of the biggest holdups on grants can often be getting people who are outside of your direct control to do the thing you're asking them to do and send it back, particularly when you're asking for a favor. So the more work you can do for them, the easier your life will be. And then, of course, just divide up tasks. If you've got a team, look through your list of all the things you have to do that you put together when you start looking at the grant and say, can you get this done by this time and this done by this time? And have them all just, do their little bits of tasks and fire stuff back, put it in your central database, and you're good to go. And of course, the last thing too is you can always look to hire a grant writer too. There's a lot of folks out there across the province who do grant writing. Their costs and percentages vary, and you can go shopping. And you want to look to justify the cost of that outlay based on the return on investment. Now, with a grant writer, of course, there's no guarantees you're going to get grants, but usually if you have somebody working under contract, writing grants, it comes back around and you can end up looking back and say, we saved ourselves hundreds of hours of staff time and we got, so many hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars over the past few years. And that's going to look good to your council. As long as you've got the money to outlay in the first place, which is not the case for everybody, but it certainly helps. Okay, some hot tips as we get near the end of the presentation. Number one, be prepared for long wait times on decisions. If your project needs to happen, then going after grants might not be the best for you. And provincial wait times are one thing. Federal wait times are an entirely different thing. Me and my team have been working on some grants where we are literally years into the process, 2 or 3 years, where we've been waiting for final decisions, where we've been going through rounds of adjudications and validations, and things take a very, very long time. I have one program that I'm near the end of running right now through SouthGrow, where getting the money to run it took 2.5 years. And now the project's been almost 2 years itself. So you can get big amounts of money, particularly from the federal government, but you got to be flexible on implementation. So that's something to keep in mind. And number two, stack grants. If you're trying to pull off a project and you're able to go after a provincial grant fund and a federal grant fund for the same project, that's fantastic because often they'll allow you to stack them together. The province will say, yep, we'll happy to give you the money. The feds will say, we'll give you the money, but they often have rules against stacking them against other buckets of provincial or federal money. So you want to go after provincial and federal together in order to get a better bang for your buck and reduce your own personal costs that you have to put in. And if you can get a yes from one grant funder, you want to let the other grant funders that you're going after know that somebody else has decided to invest in your grant. Even if you've already submitted, if you can reach out to the point of contact on that grant that you're still waiting for news from and say, hey, just wanted to let you know, can you put a note in our file that such and such ministry has approved this grant that we'd kind of put in our budget as a potential. They believe in our project, hoping you guys do too. It helps, particularly in the current environment. Often we have to play this game between the feds and the province where they want to see somebody else commit first. The province either wants to see the feds put down money in order to put their money in or vice versa. And so you got to convince one of them to pull the trigger. and then the other one jumps into. So it's a bit of a game to play, but you can definitely get some really good outcomes if you play that game. If you have an opportunity to apply for awards, either through groups like Alberta Municipalities or RMA or the Economic Developers of Alberta or any other professional associations you're involved with or nonprofit associations, if you can get awards and then put them behind your brand and your name, brag about it to your grant funders that you're applying to. It shows them that you're legit, that you've achieved something big, and that you're a good investment. It helps convince them that you can pull off the thing that you say you want to do with their funds, once again, showing them that you can give them a win. And when you don't win, get feedback. Um, we don't get grants all the time. And I try to reach out to each one of those sorry we weren't able to fund your project emails and say, can you give me feedback on my award? And sometimes it's very, very thin, like, there was just a lot of people and yours didn't score high enough. But sometimes you can get some really, really good and interesting feedback that puts you in a better position the next time when you go back to apply for a grant. And then, of course, once again, hot tip I cannot emphasize enough is be flexible, be willing to play ball with what the grantor wants to see. So, an example of that is a lot of our municipalities desperately trying to get capital funding for buildings and infrastructures. And the federal government has almost all of their grant funding that is tied to capital projects associated with energy efficiency and greening the economy and carbon emissions reduction. So you got to play ball. You got to pivot the language and pivot the goals of your projects if you want to get capital upgrades to speak to the priority of the grant funder. So pivot your capital improvement project from, okay, we just need to build a new fire hall to we're going to build the most efficient fire hall that has ever existed. And it's going to be green and it's going to be carbon neutral and it's going to have solar on top, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe there's people on your council who are like, we don't want to do that. But if the money's there and you want to get the money, you got to play the game. You got to pivot that project to meet what the grantor wants to see. And some more hot tips. Number two, be persistent. Often persistence is the qualification. So there's one grantor in particular, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. Oh, there's a few grantors actually. Also, Prairie's Economic Development, where I would say that being persistent and bashing your metaphorical forehead against the brick wall of approvals over and over and over often is the qualification that gets you to the finish line. If you just keep going after it and badgering them and pushing and badgering and pushing, that will get you to the finish line. Because sometimes there's not a limit to how much money they can give out, or they've got enough money that is being trickled out slowly enough that it really isn't oversubscribed. It's a matter of just pushing through successive layers of red tape. And that sounds exhausting because it is. But if there's no other way to fund it, sometimes that's the job. To get to the finish line is the job you have to do to get the money to make the project work. So persistence often can pay off, particularly with some of those federal funders. Another thing I see often too is that people are like, oh, well, we checked the eligibility requirements and we're not eligible. That doesn't mean you're not eligible. It just means you need to be creative. You need to find an eligible organization to partner with. And the best tip I would say for municipalities for that is own your own nonprofit. There are some municipalities in the region for example, who have community improvement societies. They call it whatever they want, but it's a nonprofit group that is the board or the committee is staffed out by members of council, members of administration, and community leaders, however you want to put it together. But it's an actual incorporated nonprofit. It is easy in Alberta to incorporate a nonprofit, and it is easy to maintain the paperwork on that. It's a couple of filings a year, one mandatory meeting, that sort of thing, and just a few bucks. And if you have that community nonprofit available and at your fingertips with even the municipality or the parent organization providing the banking and the financial oversight for it, it's fast in order to use that entity in order to submit a grant on your behalf. You can go out to groups like the Kinsman, community groups like that in order to solicit their participation so that you can apply for something that maybe you're not eligible for. But that takes more work. It takes more time. It's more effort in order to convince people who are outside your circle of influence in order to come along and partner. So you can do that, or you can do this other way where you set up and own your own nonprofit directly that has a mandate focused on improving your community, or for those who aren't community folks here, something similar. If you're not a nonprofit, you're not eligible, etc. If you're a nonprofit or charity person on this call and you need to go after a grant that is municipally controlled, you can go to the municipality as well and ask them, would you partner with us on this? So the key point, just because you're not eligible doesn't mean you can't go for it. You just got to find a partner. That's the end of the presentation. I would love to answer any questions you might have. And I do have my colleague Kim on here as well. So if I don't know the answer to the question, I'm sure she does. We're very happy to chat with you about anything we've talked about or haven't. I'm looking for hands, or if you want to just unmute yourself and come on video, please feel free to. You're welcome, Stephanie. And if you're wanting to contact SouthGrow, you can just find our contact information available on the SouthGrow website, which is southgrow.com. And drop an email, and myself or one of my team members will get back to you. Quiet group today. It is the week before Christmas. I'll do the 3 calls for questions.
Hey, Peter.
Hey.
When you talk about grant stacking, could you give us an example?
Yeah. Great recent example is the Northern and Regional Economic Development Grant from Jobs, Economy, and Trade, and the CAN Export Grant from the Federal Trade Commissioner's Office. So for a lot of communities who are doing economic development work right now, if there's an investment attraction component in there, you can go after supports from the Northern Regional Grant from the province, and you can go after the CAN Export Grant as well. And an interesting tweak that the NRED, the provincial grant, made this year is that they only allowed you to show in your budget confirmed funding. Usually in the past, you could say unconfirmed funding. So you could say, I'm going after the federal grant for some of my money. I don't know if I have it yet, but it's there. Because you couldn't do that this year, and because the CAN export timelines don't line up well with NRED, you had to go to your municipality and say, okay, the municipality is willing to put in 50% of the funding in order to get the provincial funding. And you couldn't talk about CAN export. But CAN export also requires a 50% matching. So what you were able to do this year is go to CAN export to the feds and say, okay, we'd like 50%. And so the ultimate really, really good outcome that some communities might see because of this small change is that they'll get 100% funding between the province and the feds for their projects on investment attraction. And they won't actually have to put in any of their own dollars, and they'll be in a great situation. That's an example of grant stacking and how it can be really useful.
Thank you.
All right, any more questions? Going twice. And going 3 times. Thanks so much for coming out today, folks. It was a shorter webinar than sometimes is, but I can give you back half your lunch hour if you like. And if anybody wants to chat offline, you can find my number easily enough on the SouthGrow website. Give me a shout. Happy to discuss your project with you. And don't forget to, if you're in a SouthGrow community, tell your nonprofits and your community groups about us. Oftentimes, those folks are the ones who really need the capacity and support, and we're here to help them. Have a great day, folks.
Thanks, Peter. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, John. Merry Christmas, everyone.
Thanks, Peter.